Are you a business owner looking for real advice and input? You're in the right place. From concept to launch to growth, funding, and beyond. Welcome to Startup Hustle with your hosts. One once sold a business for $150 million. The other, the author of $1 Million Bedroom. Here are your hosts of Startup Hustle, Matt DeCoursey and Matt Watson.
And we're back. Another episode of Startup Hustle. Matt DeCoursey here with Aaron Deacon, who will be sitting in for Matt Watson today. Aaron, what's up?
How's it going, Matt? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing pretty good. Congratulations on your instant promotion from guest to co-host today.
Well, I'm a fast riser.
Yeah, I know. I've always appreciated that about you. And sitting in for Master Watson is not always the easiest thing to do, but I feel like you're up for the challenge. Now, before we get started, I need to let everyone know that today's episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Fullscale.io, which is the business I own with the guy that's not here today. And we're going to talk all about what you do here in a second, but I got to thank a couple people first. So first off, once again, Penco at PencoLLC.com. We used your jewel-encrusted pens that you sent us to write today's notes. I do appreciate it. Love the pens. Go check it out. They make these pens that have these like giant 9 million carat jewels on the end of them. And also I wanted to thank the guys from Lumi Band for sending us some t-shirts and stickers and stuff. And cool band. You can check them out. Lumi Funk. Look for them on Instagram. While you're there, go check us out at Startup Hustle Podcast. And that's where you can see Aaron and I on some pictures that we'll take here shortly, and you can also find us on the Startup Hustle YouTube channel. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. Aaron, you are the managing director of KC Digital Drive. Is this true?
That is correct.
Okay, so, and you guys listening, you know I like it when you're interactive, so go to kcdigitaldrive.org, check it out while we talk all about it. What do you guys do?
So our mission, we're a nonprofit, 501c3. We've been around as an organization since 2014, a brand since 2012, and our mission is to make Kansas City a digital leader to improve the quality of life and economic opportunities for people in the region.
Okay, so how do we do that?
That's a good question. It's pretty broad, right? So we really build communities of practice at the intersection of emerging technologies and the public good.
Now let's break that down for a second. What's an emerging technology? Give us an example along the way.
Sure. So we started with Google Fiber. And that was really the instance here that sprung us into being. Nobody knew what gigabit networks were. They didn't know what gigabit speeds were. Even when you told them what they were, they didn't really understand why you needed them. And so there was kind of a dual challenge from a civic perspective. One, how do you take advantage of that, both in terms of building the apps, that are going to run on that and thinking about what kind of the future looks like, and how do you also create businesses and economic opportunities on top of that? So that's sort of the innovation side of the ecosystem. The other question was, how do you make sure it's done in an equitable way? And with that product in particular, they had a very market-driven model. We're going to let neighborhoods kind of ask for this product. We're going to go where people want it. So, that's a bit of a double-edged sword. Telco companies weren't in the habit of asking people where they wanted their infrastructure built. So that was great. We were able to get infrastructure put into a lot of disinvested neighborhoods. But there's a lot of work to be done to do that. And so that's sort of the inclusion side of what it is that we do.
For our listeners in Kansas City, they're all familiar with Google Fiber. For those of you that are listening, we've had listeners in 185 countries. Thank you, by the way. So Google Fiber, and that was 2013?
2011.
2011
was when that started.
So Google decided that they were going to pick a city in the United States, and they were going to basically restring the city's infrastructure with fiber optic internet cable. And you hear Aaron using the term gigabit. What that did was it enabled upload and download speeds of a full gigabyte is that gig per second or something like. Anyway, it's really freaking fast. Now with that came some opportunity, some attention. A lot of cities vied for that. They picked Kansas City, and thank you, Google. But we learned a lot from that pretty quickly. I rented one of the first houses that had Google Fiber in it because I thought, man, I'm going to get ahead of this innovation. And I very quickly realized that it was great, but the rest of the internet might not have been ready for that kind of speed. I compare it to driving really fast down like a highway, not an interstate, where you can go 80 and then you hit a small town, you got to go 25. So there were some other roadblocks and stuff like that. But, out of that came a lot of interesting businesses, and I feel like that really kickstarted the startup scene here in Kansas City. Do you agree with that, or?
Yeah, it did. It did in a lot of ways. I mean, and it's interesting because I think nationally there was sort of a startup-y zeitgeist moment
Sure.
that was riding alongside that.
Yep.
But I don't think there's any question that infrastructure catapulted Kansas City well beyond where it was.
We formed communities around it. There was literally like a little startup village that started about a few miles away from where we're at right now.
Yeah,
and that was built around Google Fiber, and I mean these kind of communities started forming, and then now you have to answer the question of what are we going to do with this cool technology?
Yeah, and some of it is the community itself, right? And so you see, I mean, one of the problems with emerging technology from an entrepreneurship perspective is that it's depending on how early it is in its emergence, it's going to be pre-commercial. So the startup village and all these companies, we got a lot of people looking at what are gigabit apps, and we still work on that. And we've got some things that were gigabit apps that emerged, but you had a lot of people who were looking to build businesses for right now, as you would if you're building a business. And they're like, well, but there aren't enough people that have it. So part of what we would do is build communities of people that had that orientation, that were looking forward and could see where that fit in on a roadmap, but we're still practical enough to build something that could be successful in the near term, and that could work over the contemporary internet. And I think this is this is true with any emerging tech. I mean, you look at blockchain now, for example. So you've got all sorts of, you've got Schecker's blockchain conference that he's put together here and is going to do again next year. And you have a lot of businesses, both established businesses that are dipping their toes in and saying, oh, how do we get in on blockchain? You've got new startups that are forming around it, some of which have been successful, but in a lot of ways, people are still looking for the early use cases. So how do you sort of cross that bridge between having the wherewithal, the bandwidth, as it were, to dip your toe into emerging technologies, but still have a product that's commercially viable in the near term?
Is there a blanket answer for that? Like you mentioned, like how do you bridge the gap, or how do you do certain things? I mean, I believe the answer would probably be that it's different for every situation. But I mean, are there some tried and true things that have to exist in all use cases?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a lot different in situations, but I think kind of what got us started down this path is the idea of community being important, and sort of a community of practice around what it is that you're doing, because no matter what the technology is, there's a kind of person that is interested in the bleeding edge technology. And so if you're working in healthcare, maybe 5 years ago it was, what are we going to do with gigabit? Then maybe it's, let's look at AR, VR applications in ed tech. Maybe we're looking at cloud gaming. Maybe we're looking at blockchain. The people who are interested in what's next, I think that's a kind of person or a type. And sometimes it's a role, but it's usually personality driven. And so being able to get those people together with the people who have an acute understanding of the problem that they're trying to solve, right? Because that's sort of where the disconnect, I think, typically is you've got sort of people who are tech enthusiasts who are really looking at, what's coming down the pike, this is going to be fun, this is going to be new, I want to explore, I want to push the limits. And oftentimes they don't necessarily connect with where the problem is. But you do have people who are your subject matter experts, your stakeholders, who do feel the problem acutely. Some of them couldn't care less about technology. If there's a technology solution, great. If there's not, fine. But there's a subset of those people who understand the problem who are also technology enthusiasts. And so building those communities and having them together, whether it's a group of startups that live in houses over a few square blocks that are excited about talking about those issues, or whether it's more conventional meetings or meetups, having those communities in place means that you're well positioned to respond to a new technology that comes around, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Our most popular episode of Startup Hustle this year has been the one about startup communities.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I honestly don't know what's driving that. I don't know if people are just like literally searching that and finding it, but and I know Adam Arredondo of the KC Startup Foundation. He came in and was our guest, and we talked about that. And I'm a big advocate of the community thing because I go and we sponsor the Startup Foundation and try to get involved with a bunch of different events and do a lot of stuff. And for those of you listening that are trying to figure out how to do whatever it is that you want to do, go out and talk to people about it.
Absolutely.
Go out and go surround yourself by other people that are doing things that are the same but different. And it's that communal aspect provides a lot of things that are important. A, encouragement. B, there's I mentioned encouragement, but it also can provide some drive.
For sure.
like saying, hey, let's see what we can do. You have a higher likelihood of meeting other people that want to participate. You mentioned a community of innovation and having people involved. Go find your next co-founder.
Yep.
Do a lot of different stuff. And then I think another thing that may be overlooked is sometimes, one of the things that the feedback we get about the show is they like hearing about failure. And it makes them feel better. Like, hey, I'm not a loser. Like here's someone that we having like Sandy Kemper on, who's may be the founder of Kansas City's next unicorn valuation company, and he's talking about all the things he failed at. And it's a lot easier to feel a little better about yourself. Like, hey, that's part of it, and that's that encouragement, and that hey, you just got to kind of keep doing it. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. Having and this, the Startup Foundation does a great job. First of all, of having that entrepreneurial support ecosystem. So that's part of it. And I think what Donald Hawkins is doing with KC Collective, what KC SourceLink does, which is really entrepreneur focused. I'm thinking about all the places on that journey.
Don's a Startup Hustle alumnus, and let's pause and mention what he's doing. So with KC Collective, Don's taken the effort to, find a bunch of different, vendors basically that'll give you that'll hook you up with something for free.
Yep.
And why not? Why not? And then also kind of creating they recently did something related like pitch practice.
Yep.
And just think about that. Why not? You're going to have to pitch your idea, whether it's to an investor or a client or a co-founder or whatever. And, these folks don't, Don doesn't make money off of KC Collective. That's he likes helping out and doing that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that can begin to create a community of innovation.
Yeah, and that's hugely valuable, I think, for the ecosystem as a whole and for the founders. But there are a lot of people also within the innovation ecosystem who aren't necessarily going to lead companies,
Sure.
and a lot of the resources and even the framing, right? There has gotten to be a lot of talk about entrepreneurial ecosystem, which means that the framework is really on the entrepreneur. How do we support entrepreneurs? You look at Kauffman Foundation's work around. I think they say for every 3 entrepreneurs, there are 997 people that aren't the entrepreneurs, and how do we help, them orient towards the entrepreneurs? And I think that's all very important work. But there are other ways, I think, of thinking about the innovation ecosystem where the entrepreneur plays a role towards outcomes. But there are other ways to support that ecosystem that aren't all focused sort of on supporting that particular kind of cog in the wheel, if that makes sense.
What are a couple examples?
So universities,
Okay.
university research. There's a ton of resources there, both in terms of kind of the underlying foundational research that drives some of the innovation, and so thinking about how you bring that in, and a couple examples. The tech transfer programs at the universities, and then whiteboard to boardroom specifically that the Innovation Center runs, right? That is, okay, we've got all these professors who are coming up with IP. They don't care sometimes about commercializing it, or maybe they do and they just don't know how because it's not their skill set, or they're not incentivized within their organization to do that. But that's a pretty important piece, developing the intellectual capital. So that one kind of has the university on one side and the entrepreneur on the other side. We run a program here called Metro Lab, and this is part of a national program, but we've got the local Metro Lab partnership, which puts university resources towards civic problems. So Metro Lab nationally bills itself as tech transfer for the public sector. just came back from their national annual summit last week in Boulder, and that project is looking at the cities, local government or local public-facing institutions for problem sets that faculty can solve. So there was the National Science Foundation runs a grant program called Smart and Connected Communities, and it's a really interesting program for NSF. I don't know how much you know about their grant making. They're very, very much about foundational basic research. So one of the things that's unique about this Smart and Connected Communities program is that it's looking more to applied research, right? So how do we take fundamental, basic research and make it, position it in a way where it's solving community problems. And it also is really looking to bring together technical kind of engineering research with social science research. So we do a lot of work facilitating the relationship between city governments and the universities so that those assets at the university can be directed towards problems. There may be companies that come out of that, and it's great to have entrepreneurs as part of that conversation, but it's different when your orientation is, maybe solving a city problem, maybe helping a university with their research project, maybe helping students in the class gain some real world experience and be part of a sort of practicum project. That's a different kind of outcome and orientation than, say, starting a business and figuring out what product market fit is and doing all of the stuff that you would do, especially to create a venture-backed business.
So let's talk about business creation for a second, because you mentioned something, 10 minutes ago about the difference between a now business and a future business.
Yeah.
And, that's actually like a really great point. Recently, and I don't know what episode it'll come out before this one, but we had a couple inventors in here. And, one of the things about great inventors, and I cited some opinions, and I used Ray Kurzweil, who's a very well-known inventor. Mm-hmm. And Ray said, look, the most cutting-edge inventors are thinking about what they want to build in 10 years, not next year.
Right.
And that's the difference between a future business and a now business.
For sure.
And, he's sitting there. There's I don't know, you can find it on Netflix. I think it's about singularity and like the bonding of man and machine and like how that's just really inevitable. And it's like kind of weird because you're like, oh, is that science fiction? It's almost like science now, like it's getting there. But, they use principles like Moore's law and different stuff to like say, okay, I can't build this now, but I might be able to build it later.
Right.
And if you aren't thinking about that and what you want to do in 10 years, and you're trying to do it on a year's notice, I mean, you might pull it off, but there might be someone that is 9 years ahead of you when it comes to thinking it out and getting it planned and doing stuff like that. So now in Congress, with what you're saying, like you also mentioned a professor. Well, it might have a great idea, but he's a professor. That's the kind of all he wants to do. And maybe there's someone out there that has a bigger interest in creating a business around it and doing stuff like that. So with your at Casey Digital Drive, and by the way, go to caseydigitaldrive.org to see more about what Aaron's doing. But how do you help someone understand? Because a business that has a better has a better timing for launch, and blockchain's a good example. I mean,
sure.
6 years ago was just too early for so many things, and now everyone's blockchain. So what are some tips that you can give our listeners or some input related to figuring out whether you have a now business or a future business, or if you can even get a business out of it at all?
Find a user. It doesn't even have to be a customer. And this kind of depends on where you are in the cycle and what if you are venture backed, you need to find a customer.
Yeah. Which is a user of some sort, but yeah.
Yeah, but if you're not venture backed, or if you don't know yet if you're going to start a business, you're working on a side project, or you're a hobbyist, or you're interested, or you just maybe you're dabbling in blockchain, or you've got a full-time development job someplace else, you think this is interesting, you think you've got a great idea, and you start building it. And we see people come in all the time. We run a hack night every week, Code for KC, which is part of the Code for America network. It's our brigade. It's civic tech volunteers. They build stuff for some local government, but nonprofits and things like that.
And you've got information about those and links on your website.
Absolutely. Yep. You can go to caseydigitaldrive.org/Code for KC. Codeforkc.org has its own site, actually, and you can see the projects that are in the pipeline. But we will get, and have historically gotten, people that come in and they either have built something or they pitch an idea and they're like, we think this is needed. We think this is needed out in the marketplace. Sometimes they'll get some people and they'll build it. And you're like, well, who's going to use it? Well, we're going to show it to them after we build it. Which, you can do that, but if you get them in the room before you start building it, you're going to be closer. And similarly,
and there's reasons that's important, because I've made this mistake myself, and a user will tell you what they really want, and if you don't have the actual users in that data, you're guessing.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up invariably building stuff that takes time, costs money, takes focus away, because you think you know exactly what that needs, and then the users will tell you otherwise in a lot of cases. So
right.
don't sit on it and wait. That's why people say just let the baby be ugly, put it out there, and see what people have to say about it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and so from a, again, that's if you're creating a business, I think the incentive is clear, right? Because you need, a business by its nature has customers, and that's what you're working towards. If you're a researcher, and really you're, just interested in knowledge for its own sake, and you are interested in algorithms that allow you to do, say, video surveillance analytics and be able to tag things in real time, and that's a really interesting question to you. How do you have a video camera that's up? Maybe, you've got a network of, say, 10 video cameras along a street, and they're watching what's happening along the street, and you'd like notifications for when certain things happen. So there's machine learning questions there, there's, image recognition questions, there's stitching together video, there may be some network questions about how you combine all that video in one place on the back end. Like, there's a lot of really technical stuff there, and the use case is going to have varying levels of motivation, right? And so there could be somebody who's like, yeah, I really am trying to solve this problem through doing this, but probably if you're an engineering researcher and it's got a PhD in machine learning or network analysis or things like that, those questions are the ones that really motivate you. And that's not something that necessarily somebody at the city or at the police department or at one of the storefronts who has the camera that's doing the video, they're probably not going to care about what your technical solution is. And they're probably not going to understand it even if you explained it to them. They may care about what the use case is, about if you can solve a problem. And so that's the kind of connection that there's not necessarily an apparatus for when it's not. I mean, there's growing to be more. I mean, like, you're forced to do that as a business. And if you've got investors, they're going to say, you need to do your product market fit, you need to go interview some customers, and you're either going to spend time for that or we're going to give you money to go do that, because that's part of the business side of this. But if you're not necessarily working towards a business and you're just worried about the problem, either the technical problem or the social problem, that capacity is not always there, and it's not easy to find. So that's part of the gap that we try to fill as an organization.
I think one thing that a lot of people don't understand, or they haven't learned this yet, is that there are investors that will actually give you small amounts of funding to go answer some of those questions you just mentioned. Like, okay, we're interested in this, but before we give you a check for $3 million, we'd rather write one for $30K and figure it out. Now, but think about that, and this should be very encouraging for those of you listening, because, by the way, the first time someone ran this by me, I was like, what? But literally, you can make your pitch saying, hey, I'm trying to raise $100,000 so I can define the total addressable market, I can define what the user needs are, blah, 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 blah. And I just want to I'm literally going to burn through all this cash. I am guaranteed to not get $1 of return in revenue, but we will know a hell of a lot at the end of that. And, that's like a different risk, risk profile for an investor, but it can really, that's really a suitable approach in some cases.
It is, especially if you make the case that you've got the team to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, investors always invest in teams.
If you don't have any street cred, or history, you're probably not going to get that $100K check. But if you have a background, if you you just mentioned like the video, whatever. If you, hey, I have a history with machine learning and open computer vision and stuff like that, and I think I can find a solution. Like, you probably find someone that might back you to try to figure out if it's worthy of pursuing.
Yeah, well, especially if you have sort of the entrepreneurship gene, right?
Yeah.
If you're motivated to go out and sell that and sell yourself, because there are a lot of people who I think have the technical qualifications and probably the curiosity, but they may not have the entrepreneurship orientation. So they may be a little bit more modest in how they talk about themselves, and they may say, "Oh, here's a thing," or "I don't really know if someone's going to spend money on this," or they may even undersell their own qualifications to be able to deliver
See it
on
all
it
the time, Aaron.
because
all the time.
That's not necessarily who they are. So.
So you need to find someone that's equipped and willing to tell you how awesome they are.
Yeah, kind of. Can you do that?
Yes, all day. Ask my wife. But there's and the other Matt's not here, but that is what makes he and I a good partnership with our business. Matt is highly technical. Matt writes code. I tell people I don't write code. I write checks.
Right.
I'm good at selling stuff, promoting things, going out and being that part of the business. And I leave Matt back at the office figuring the other stuff out. And he's cool with that. I'm cool with that. Now, that said, that's what you can go and try to find in the communities of innovation.
Absolutely.
That exist around you. That's why you need to go out and get involved. You are not going to find these people to partner up with without that interaction.
Right, and sometimes you can get it as a first customer too.
True.
So
True.
you can certainly go towards the investor angle, but
sometimes your customer can be your investor.
That's right.
I mean, that is also a very common scenario. Like you look at these niche solutions or things like if you can make life easier, if you can help someone sell more or spend less, you got a shot.
Yep.
Those three things right there, you have a shot. So relieve a pain point. Help them sell more, help them spend less. If you can do all three of those, then you're really on to something.
And a lot of people can fund R&D to some level. I mean, it doesn't need to be a big. I mean, it might be that 20 or 30,000 that you're talking about, and you say, well, I think I've got an answer to your problem down the road. I'm not sure what it is now, but if it's figuring out the market or figuring out, how to crystallize a pain point a little bit more, or maybe building some foundational piece of your technology, you may find a company or a city or another kind of stakeholder that is your eventual customer that says, yeah, we can put $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 towards helping to build out proof of concept.
So do you want to know what I think step one is in raising $1 million for anything?
Sure.
You got to believe you can raise $1 million for something.
That's absolutely true.
I know that sounds super simplistic, but think about that, people. You're thinking I need to do this, but do you really believe that you can do it? Because you talked about having that entrepreneur chip or that gene. Well, I got it, man, and I see it in my daughter already. And
that's
she's
fantastic.
Not even 5 yet. I saw it when she was 3. She didn't want a dollhouse for Christmas. She wanted a lemonade stand, and I didn't push that. It's there, but with that, there's also this crazy sense of self-belief and you gotta, I wrote about it in one of my books. There's a lot of people that are going to tell you no, that they're going to say no, you'll never do it, blah, 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 blah. You got to kind of weed through whether they're right or wrong.
Yep.
And be a little crazy.
Did you get a lemonade stand?
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah.
How much lemonade did she sell?
It was really funny because after that we set it up. And it took me forever to build. It took forever, and I left my power drill here at the office.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm literally on Christmas Eve trying to put this thing together, and I'm like, you got to be kidding. The first night, I need this, but so we put it together, and we mixed up some lemonade the next day, and she was selling it, and I asked her, I said, well, why do I what if I don't like your lemonade? And she said to me, she goes, well, maybe you should try it and then let me know after. And I wanted to cry. I was like, oh my God, my 4-year-old just handled an objection and and then I asked if I could buy her a lemonade. And she said, yes, but I'm just going to sell it after.
Did you get her a nightgown that says always be closing?
I don't think I need to. I think she gets it. The sad thing is I also realized at that point that she knew more about selling than a lot of people that I see. And I say that you have to sell something eventually, people.
Right.
Everything we're talking about now, we're talking about digital transformation and innovation ecosystems and communities of innovation. Well, eventually it has to monetize on some level. Now there are cases where that might not be the case, but it really still is. Even if the government is your partner and you're getting grants, you talk about NSF and all these different things, unless you're going to just live for free somewhere and do whatever. Like, you got to have some resources, and that's where you have to figure that out.
Yeah, there needs to be a business model. Even in the nonprofit world, right? I mean, it may not be selling a product, and it may not be purely profit driven, but if you're doing work, you've got to be creating value, and it's got to be value that is compensated somewhere else in the value chain. And there are a lot of different ways that happens. So, I mean, that's part of the, what's important too when you think about entrepreneurship, again, is not just, and you see this in a lot of places, but it's not just business creation. It is helping people figure out business model and figuring out what that sort of value exchange model is in a lot of different contexts.
It's not, so much of that stuff is really, 101 level course matter. We're talking about, you have expenses, you have revenue, you have things that you need to plan for. And I see too many people fail when it comes to, they wait too long. They wait too long to try to sell something, to try to find resources, and you die on the vine.
Yeah.
You die on the vine. So I'm sure you've seen that. You get people that are like, okay, how long till you're out of money? 6 weeks. What are you doing about that? Well, we just started trying to find investors. All right, cool. Well, you're getting a job or doing something, because it just doesn't happen that fast.
Yeah.
So, all right. So with Casey Digital Drive, and we've talked a lot about all the things I just mentioned. One of the things I have in my notes here is talking about how you view opportunity. And I know we just talked about that, but do you find yourself in situations where you have to just be real honest with people sometimes, like, hey, it's going to be a tough go at it? Oh,
yeah. I mean, I think, we try to be honest with people all the time and pretty straightforward about what it is that they're facing, about how, what their idea is and what their chances for success are. I think, we're very much a network organization. And so part of that is, I think, being really open to what people perceive as their own opportunity. So I'll definitely tell people, I get what you're saying. I think the problem that you're solving is real. I have no idea how you're going to do what it is that you're talking about. Your go-to-market strategy doesn't make any sense to me. But, let me know how I can help. Let me know what sort of connections you need, and let's see, because a lot of what is required to make something successful is a person who's pursuing it, who's passionate about it, and who is willing to be a champion for it, especially if they're coachable, right? So there can be somebody who's got a lot of passion around a certain problem, and it may not at all be clear that they've got a way to get there, but if they're genuine and they want to learn, and they're skilled in something, they've got to have some skills and competence as well. But they can sort of create new opportunities, I think, out of that. The other way that we think about opportunity is the flip side of risk, especially from a civic technology perspective. So when you think about our work as emerging technologies, and a lot of the conversation, especially from an innovation perspective, and certainly in the startup world, where there's a lot of hype and a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of boosterism around sort of whatever's coming next, like, that is a very optimistic mindset towards opportunity, which is great. And like, you really need to have that in an ecosystem. That is an essential component. It's not always the most realistic, which is good. I mean, like, that's part of the bargain, right? That's what you get when you get like the hard charger who's really ambitious and excited about whatever the thing is that's coming next. But technology is sort of morally neutral, right? I mean, it helps us be more efficient at whatever it is that we're doing. And so if we're not doing something that's great, or if we've got a system that's in place and then we layer technology on top of it, it might expand inequity, or it might further a system that's already doing something unjust. So we've got to be thinking about the opportunities that are in front of us with both those things in mind. And it's a tough balance to figure out sort of where sometimes to come down in terms of tolerating the chance for things to go wrong, so that you've got an open field for innovation, versus being thoughtful about what the downside potential is.
So if you happen to be watching on the Startup Hustle YouTube channel, you saw me doing a whole lot of head nodding there, and And can I have a brief moment to weigh in on this? Because I think I think you nailed it. I think when you look at how do you view your opportunity? I tell people this a lot. If you are not passionate about the opportunity, just don't pursue it. Don't, because you'll quit. You're going to quit. It's hard. There's really like no easy way around. I like to say that success demands payment in advance. And if you're not willing to write that check, and there's very, very little variance to this. Like that's kind of my personal tagline. And you know, that came with my book, Balance Me. And you know, success demands payment in advance. So you got to pay up front. And you know, people, I'd say prove that theory. I say, well, it proves itself over and over again. You see people and you think they became an overnight success, or like that I don't know, whoever was good right away. And once you get below the surface, you realize they probably put in a hell of a lot of time. They went through a lot of adversity. They did a lot of different things. So if you're not passionate about it, it's gonna eventually wear you down, and you're gonna quit. And another thing is you know, passion's difficult to fake.
Yeah.
And people that are seasoned at entrepreneurship, at business, people that write checks, people that do investments, they will smell that a mile away. You can tell. You can just tell when people are passionate about something. And you know, you mentioned like that person that's going to charge right through things or do different stuff. Those people are passionate. Mm-hmm. And you know, as far as your first evaluation of how you view your opportunity, like how passionate are you about it? Because it eventually does become a grind.
It's a totally random thought that I have when you said that. Do people ever hire actors as their pitchmen?
No, but that's not a bad business. Maybe we should start a marketplace for that.
Maybe so.
Because you know, that's you know, I mean, it's tough.
It is.
It's tough. You know, it's the whole, you can be passionate about the problem you're solving without being like, hey, here I am, Mr. Passion. Right. You know, that's different. And I mean, like, you are just deeply driven to fix it.
Yep.
You know, and so often that's where business and entrepreneurship kind of become hard for some people, because a lot of people started a business accidentally. They had a passion to do something. Yep. And you know, maybe it wasn't necessarily to fix a problem. Maybe they had a passion as an artist or something like that. And now they're like, hey, this is what I really want to do. Oh, wait, there's a business component to that. And some people get kind of far down the line and they're like, oh shit, I don't know anything about the rest of this stuff. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do?
Well, I mean, and you can also, there's I think a slightly different type that is also just passionate about winning.
That's me.
Right? So you, I mean, and you may or may not care one way or the other what problem it is that you're trying to solve. But you like solving problems, and you like being the first to solve them and the best to solve them.
Well, if I'm going to put my effort into it, I want to do it well. Yep. But I say no to so much stuff. I didn't always, but now I do.
Well, prioritizing is important.
Well, so recently there's a Netflix documentary about Bill Gates. It's called In the Mind of Bill or something like that. And I've never really been a big Bill Gates follower. I've just never really cared, you know. But so much of you know, I watched it and I was like, wow, you know, dude's like really doing a lot of stuff. But you know, this is one of the most successful, wealthiest, and smartest people out there. And like he addresses pretty quickly. He's like, I have the exact same limitation that you do. I have 24 hours in a day. I can do X amount of stuff, and I have to choose what I want to do, who I want to do it with, and where my focus is going to be. And you know, regardless of the passion that you have for solving. So what are you going to take on? Are you going to fix the big problem? Are you going to fix different problems? And you know, you can get pretty sidetracked in a hurry.
I will say that Bill Gates has the capacity to outsource quite a bit more than
sure.
I do.
Well, sure, yeah, right. I mean, some of the things that they were talking about, they're really close to literally eradicating polio. In 2018, there were only 33 known cases of polio in the world, which is crazy.
It is crazy.
I mean, they're like one step away from that, and then And then the next step of the documentary is they were after the tsunami in Japan and the Fukushima, I think it was called, the nuclear reactor went ape shit and melted down, and he focused his attention on getting together. They hadn't had any true innovation in nuclear power. Well, that's a green solution, but how do you do it and make it safe so it's not going to go Chernobyl on us?
Right.
Which, if you've seen that
not
miniseries on
seen that one
HBO,
either.
it is frightening. I did not ever realize how totally screwed we almost were with that. It was like, oh my God, this is really bad. And
we still might be. Who knows?
Well, maybe, but so you talk about where you're going to focus your energy and where's your passion, and for him, it's not necessarily it's just interesting because you look at people that I don't know, if you have $65 billion or whatever, you also have every reason to not give a shit about so many other things, and you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna buy islands and hang out on them and be left alone. And,
yeah, I mean, you kind of do. I mean, you just think that that's not the way those people are wired.
well, but that's my point. Is he's still
right.
solving problems
Right.
and passionate about doing things, and has a genuine interest in. And the dude's been under a lot of scrutiny. They ask him about hey, well, you may have formed a monopoly, and
Sure.
and different stuff, and maybe not everything he did was within. You talk about moral neutrality. Well, I mean, they were kind of putting their foot on people's throats and saying, "See ya."
No,
So,
the actors aren't morally neutral.
right. So, but back to the subject is of taking on things that you're passionate about, and now with that, if you can find other people that are passionate about the same thing you are, now you're building a tribe, and you're getting people together, and that's back to this whole spirit of communities of innovation, and so when you're viewing your opportunity, I think a very important question to ask is, who else cares about this?
Absolutely.
And because I've got bad news for you. If you're the only one, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. And by the way, someone out there listening, you know who you are. There's something you give a shit about that no one else cares about, and you need to just give it up and go do something productive. So usually people that are the kind of probably in the ballpark of sweating the small stuff,
Right.
I mean, focus that attention on something useful and make a difference.
Yeah.
But if you can find other people around you that are passionate, now you've got other people, and 2 turns into 4, turns into 8, and next thing you know, you might be able to get something done.
Yep.
I mean, whether it's a business or not, but that's where it all starts.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the approach. It'll probably this episode will probably air after National Digital Inclusion Week, which is October 7th to 11th. But when you look at sort of passionate communities of practice,
Digital Inclusion Week.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Kansas City Coalition for Digital Inclusion is a local group that meets at the downtown branch of the Kansas City Public Library once a month, and has been meeting now for 5 or 6 years around the topic of digital equity and how we make sure that underserved communities get access to the same technologies that everybody else has. And that is a great example of the business case there isn't always super clear.
Sure.
But you've got passionate people who are passionate about a problem and have a group of like-minded people and have found a tribe that has been very supportive and has been able to lead to an organization locally like Connecting for Good. Have you guys had them on your?
No.
You ought to have Connecting for Good on, because they are a nonprofit startup that's, I think they started in 2012 maybe, and have built up an amazing national brand and program portfolio around delivering internet service, refurbishing computers, and delivering them to needy communities. They do a ton of work in digital skills delivery, and then have started to form partnerships with, for example, I think United Way doing tax prep, right? So it's not just access to technology and how do you use it, but okay, now we're going to start working on, we've got all these every tax season. You need people that need to come do their taxes. We have programs that help underserved communities do their taxes. Well, let's teach them how to use digital skills while we do that. And so it's been.
I mean, it's that adage of teach a man to fish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's that's a neat, a really neat community. And there's a whole national community now. So National Digital Inclusion Alliance is the organization that has networked together nationally communities like this in different cities. But when you start to look at the scale power of finding people that are passionate about what you're passionate about, it really gives you a ton of runway. Angela, who leads that national organization, is now meeting with senators and congressmen regularly and pushing policy agendas on a national level. And it's all because people who were active and passionate and doing something on the ground started to find each other and build critical mass around their topic.
Back to the tribe.
That's right.
I like to say, your tribe is your vibe. I mean, it's a really interesting. I'm completely fascinated with the whole subject of tribe building. And by the way, I don't do book recommendations very often, but Seth Godin wrote a great book called Tribes.
Oh, cool.
And just for the power of, like, if you're trying to build something, like whatever it is that you're trying to do, if you can find people that are passionate about it, you can form a community. And if in the concept of tribe building, you want to create as much value in the interaction that they get with each other as they do with the cause or your product or whatever it is that you're doing. And he immediately, this is a weird example on an entrepreneurship podcast, but he uses the example of the Grateful Dead.
Oh,
and
that's a great example.
Those people they would follow the band anywhere that they went because they found just as much value in seeing their friends.
Yep.
And being around. They didn't care. I mean, sure, they'd like to go in the show, but they didn't care if they didn't get in. They were cool. They wanted to see their friends.
That's right.
Had a good time with that. And that is a perfect example of finding as much value in the community around you as you do with cause. And with that, lifelong friendships were formed. People met at those shows and got married and just like different kinds of stuff. And a lot of the people that come from these external communities around, so they end up doing other really cool stuff because you get around like-minded people.
Yep.
And they manage to get stuff done. So if you're out there listening, make sure to go to kcdigitaldrive.org. If you're trying to innovate something, we might be able to help. Maybe so, maybe not. But go to fullscale.io, see what Matt Watson and I do. While you're on the internet, if you could stop by at Instagram and check us out at Startup Hustle Podcast, or maybe go become a subscriber at the somewhat new YouTube channel. You can also verify that I do, in fact, have a face made for radio when you're when you're there. So trying to do the best we can to continue to get the word out in the entrepreneur community. So as we round things out, Aaron, is there a last statement or anything you'd like to leave the Startup Hustle Nation with when it comes to get anything? Give you a true freestyle here. And you were great at following the lead, and now you got to figure it out. But no, I mean, anything you'd like to say or pitch or push or direct people to, like go for it.
So, I would just encourage, and I don't know, what percentage of your well, I'm not going to put you on the spot with that.
Of listeners are here in Kansas City?
Yeah.
It's I don't know, but we have more listeners outside of Kansas City than in Kansas City, and we got a lot of listeners in Kansas City.
So I would say for people not here and people who are here, you can look us up and you can find us. If you're not, look for the stakeholders in your local ecosystem who are interested. One, go to a startup event. Look at your entrepreneurship community. But you're probably already there. If you're entrepreneurship motivated, you're going to be looking at Meetup or trying to figure out where the entrepreneurs get together. But go and look at some of the other folks who are interested in innovation and who are using technology to try to solve problems and see if there are ways to get involved. I think there's benefit potentially for your community, but also for your business. You can get involved and forge relationships that I think are going to be really beneficial, mutually beneficial. And
those aren't always instant.
No, and they're not always apparent. You sometimes have to do a little bit more searching to those. Or for those, rather, if what your kind of main focus is entrepreneurship.
You mentioned not knowing what the reason is and it not immediately being apparent. Matt Watson and I are a perfect example of that. So I had exited a business at the end of 2016. Here comes 2017, and Matt was asking me a lot. What are you going to do? What are you going to do next? I don't know. I'll let you know when I figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Podcast. That's what I want to do. I want to do a podcast.
Oh man. Well, we ended up doing that later too. But at one point, Matt said, we were like, I think we're going to do something together, not really sure what. And he said, come on down, take an office here at where we're at now. And, I said, all right, sure. So came to work, not trying to figure it out. And I had some other stuff going at the time, but, as we continued to be near each other and discuss certain things and do different stuff, eventually it just kind of presented itself. And, I think that's really the crux of what Aaron has and what we've been talking about today is getting around people and, I don't know, just getting it figured out.
That's the way it works.
So anyway, Aaron, thank you so much for coming down today. I appreciate it. This was a very stimulating conversation. I feel like I shouldn't have had my focus on National Punctuation Day and should have instead been focusing on digital inclusion, but I've always got the future to go ahead and change that.
There you go. Well, thanks a lot. It's been fun.
Yep. See you next time.
All right.